Create, the show about art, with Franz, Sidney. Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 8 of Create with Franz. Today it's a sweltering hot day. It's 30 degrees inside my house in Celsius and it's 37 in the shadow outside. So it's terrible. We're stuck to our city. It's a terrible thing, but we absolutely love the idea of talking about something really beautiful, which is cartoons and animation. And today we are going to have a special guest, which is again our friend Steve Young, who came to talk to us last time. And today Steve will tell us how he got into this particular part of art, how he uses that as a form of self-expression, and he will give us also a few tips in the end of the program to tell us how to get into this market and how you can do your best. So, Steve, welcome to the show again.
Hi there, Franz. Sure. Yeah. So, as I said in my last time I was on, when I began to learn to sculpt, I got a Wallace and Gromit modeling kit. And just to throw us right back to that moment, it took me down two sides of art. One side was the sculpture side, and the other side was the animation side. I started looking at Aardman, as well as the making things. I started looking at what Aardman did and looking at stop motion and drawing, and this sort of leads us towards the cartoons and animated characters and things like that. And it didn't really hit me at first that you could do animation as a job in the future. But I loved the styles. I loved the style of characters and how they were larger than life, and these characters were chunky and interesting, and and all this squash and stretch that was going on.
Tell me a little bit, which characters were you inspired by? I don't know, The Simpsons or Disney or Wallace and Gromit. What was your favorite?
Sure. Well, I loved Wallace and Gromit. It started out with Wallace and Gromit, and it started out with Disney. And I loved the hand-drawn side, and I loved the models. The characters like Chicken Run and the early Wallace and Gromits, like wrong trousers and close shave. And then it went on to look at the Disney films, such as Aladdin and Sword in the Stone, and all these kinds of characters, and it just blew my mind that these things were drawn, on paper, time after time after time, and this, and flip books and things like that. I just found it so interesting that you could draw and bring all this characterization and life out of 2D images, or even in the case of animation for Aardman, models. They brought models to life. These characters. So yeah, definitely backwards and forwards between somewhere between Disney and Aardman.
That is great, and I think I had the same passion. I absolutely loved every movie made by Disney. I didn't look into anything, nowadays people will say, what is for political message? I just loved the look. It was so clean and beautiful. These were people who could actually draw really beautifully. The stroke was magnificent, and everybody was just beautifully drawn. And, I can't remember any of the names because I grew up in Italy, so all the names are different, and I have to look them up for what's in English. But I will have to say, I had my Disney books when I was young, and I have still some of them in my daughter's bedroom. And I absolutely remember spending hours and hours just staring at the pictures. And when I was a little bit older and I learned how to do a little bit of drawing and just using my Pantones and a bit of watercolor, I did some drawings copying those images because they were really stuck in my mind and they really influenced how I wanted my drawings to look at. And in fact, when I was about 30, I went to have a portfolio evaluation from a very famous, I wouldn't say her name, but a very famous person in England, part of the Association of Illustrators in Milan. And she had a look at my portfolio and she goes, Ah, you can tell you really like Disney. You have to detach from this style. And I was absolutely crushed.
Yeah, there's so many times, isn't there, where we will latch onto a style. I mean, I remember looking at there's an artist called Glenn Keane, who was an incredible, animator. Not, he's very well known for Disney. He animated Ariel and The Beast and Pocahontas, and there's done some great stuff on his own as well once he left Disney. But you just looking at their mark making and their passion for the subject. Like he animated Tarzan, the character of Tarzan in the animated version, and he's absolutely mind-blowingly talented. And just seeing the amount of how they could capture motion, from these characters really inspired me so much growing up. Definitely.
So you had the chance to view the images. Then you started to wonder at the beauty of the images and how these people were able to move the images, which I'm telling you, it wasn't on paper, it was actually on transparent cell, and they were colored one by one. When I was training in Disney, we were doing some of it. And I remember having very, very specific inks. They were called Luma. And it was only Disney style, so only 4 or 5 little Donald Duck style things. And they have those specific colors. And there was this little girl on the corner, and she was doing just that the whole day. And I just wanted to be like her, you know. It was wonderful, this magic world. And I remember in Italian you would call it capo servizio, so the service head of the area of a place where you make Mickey Mouse. You design the whole story. And he was looking, one of his illustrators was there, and he was showing one of the drawings and all these lovely bunnies all together doing something. And I looked at the drawing because I was at a big table with him, and I was like, wow. And the head, Lo Staffa, he was saying, yeah, but this bunny doesn't look happy enough. And that one, what is he doing there? And he was asking all these questions. And I was like, what? This is perfect. So much work for these illustrators. They had to draw and redraw everything until the head of that office was very happy with your work, because your work had to go worldwide. Because at that time in Italy, in the 80s, we were doing the Mickey Mouse for the United States. It was translated later on. So there's quite a responsibility. So it's not just about being able to draw, but to interpret the brief you are given and then be able to change and do this fast, because there are timings for that. Did you have any experience doing an experiment, maybe trying to do movement at home? You did. Tell me.
Right. So after trying things out through drawings and things like that, I wanted to do animation. So that's where my degree came in. So my very first animation test actually came as I was doing my degree. I'd made a big jump from making still models and still drawings to animating and testing out my animation. So I started creating characters that I could animate through plasticine. I 3D printed one of my characters. I made a stop motion. I made a couple of stop motion characters, whether it was a spider or I made a little Grim Reaper's sidekick character. And my final degree piece, my third year, was a nymph character, a girl that resides in the forest among the trees. And I built a set for it and got her moving about. And it was just a fantastic time to try out the medium and try to get things moving. I mean, I made all these different facial expressions, and I took cues from Leica. I don't know if you know the company Leica, who do Coraline and their animations over in America. They did Coraline and Cuba and the Two Strings, and the recent film The Missing Link as well. They do some really, really great animation. Anyway, they 3D print all the individual faces. They face swap the characters' faces. Instead of doing individual drawings, they'll do 3D printed faces of different expressions, and they will remove multiple faces. Well, I got this idea and I made a press mold of the character's face. And then I made that face in multiple times in different poses, so I could swap magnetic faces off of the animated character, so you could switch expressions and things like that. And it had removable eyes, and it was a great experiment.
How did you feel when you were using the technical side and the practical side, and then the inspirational and the creative? Did you have like a balance between all these parts, or did you feel like, oh, today I actually do not want to do any animation because I'm not there? I mean, did you go by mood?
Yeah, sure. I switched backwards and forwards because I love to be a model maker. So there were days when I wasn't animating, I was literally making the set, or I was making the characters, or I was painting. I was making toadstools for this enchanted clearing, and I must have made about 50 odd handmade toadstools, painted them in acrylics and then glue gunned to set. And I think I used up all my Warhammer scenery flock, flocking the whole scenery and making sure that there was grass and things like that. So you go backwards and forwards between experimenting with the movement, or if for some reason there was a part of it that wasn't ready, you'd try and get the bit ready that needed to be done and ready for set. So my main character wasn't ready one day, so I worked on a spider character so that I could bring in something quite simple, but I would still have some sort of movement within the sequence. So there's an example. Yeah.
Certainly you would not see me do a spider character. I don't know about my audience, but I'm a bit terrified. If perhaps I'm walking somewhere and there's my spider, I would be like, oh my gosh, not really keen on walking on that for some reason. But it's such a good experimenting time for you. How old were you when you're doing these things? Were you in your early 20s?
Where was I? Right, so I got married at 26, 27, 28. I think I was 28, 29 when I was doing the 3.
Okay. And so after you did learn how to do this, right? How did you feel about continuing and doing only that? Was that an option for you?
Well, just doing animation?
Just animation.
Right. So as I was making it, I do love animation, and I may go back to doing more animation in the future. But I felt within myself that where I'm happiest is being a model maker. And you can be a model maker for animation. You can be a model maker for stop motion animation. You can be a prop maker. You can be a set maker. You can do any of these things. And the thing that really drives me and interests me, especially when I watch the special features of films and animations, like for example, I was watching Frankenweenie, which is a Disney animation that happens to be stop motion animated, and they have a behind the scenes featurette where they show you the scenes where they build the sets, they build the characters, and they build the little dog Sparky that scampers around the set. And this was kind of similar to some of the things Arbin were doing, but in a very different stylistic approach. And it really hit home to me that I love the model making side. I'd quite happily, be fixing the armatures, or I'd quite happily be painting characters or making molds for them, or all these sorts of things. So I think I'm more of a model maker than an animator. But I definitely loved learning about how animation characters are built through making my own animation.
Okay, so that's the angle. That's interesting, because I think it's also more creative, because you're not stuck with a theme. Maybe that's the office is telling you do this, do that. You can create what you want, so you have freedom of expression, right? So let's go to the mindfulness part and how a person feels when he's in the process of creating something new. We are now in times of COVID-19 in this moment, 2020, but it's going to be over, and we're going to look back and say, oh, thank God it's over. But in this moment, when people need to perhaps chill out a little bit and relax and find something new and different, just to take our minds off all this that is happening in the world, I always think that all the arts are very useful. So something complex like model making could be quite interesting, and even for parents with children who are now not going to school, is it possible that people could learn model making and use that as an activity to maybe bring together a family or spend time together even online? And then perhaps, yeah, there will be, 10% of people that might want to really go and study that.
Sure. So, yes, definitely. I think model making can be done from a basic level all the way up to super professional. If you wanted to do it as a family, there is like if you wanted to do it as from the angle of animation, for example, you can get a really simple animation app that you can get on your iPad, or you can get through a camera or even your camera phone, that you can set up a really basic set. Stick your camera phone down on the table on a little tripod, and bring in your own little characters. I've seen things on YouTube where people use Lego characters, or they animate their action figures, and get those to walk about the table, even to a little soundtrack. But for those people who want to make models, sure, yeah, you can start with your plasticine. You can do things with Play-Doh. You can, if you have a 3D printer, you could print out some parts if you wished. You could make things out of odds and ends, like little bits of paper characters and sellotape, or made out of bendable wire. My little spider character was literally a ball of epoxy putty with two beads stuck into it and some flexible movable wire to make for the legs. I painted the body, painted the little eyes, and then you'd have a little six to eight legged spider character that would scurry along and scurry across the tabletop. And it was brilliant because it felt so tactile and real. You knew the thing was really in front of the camera. And definitely, I think people need to just give it a go. As soon as you know there's 24 frames a second or 12 frames a second, it feels a little bit more possible. Oh, 12 frames, that character can scurry from here to there.
What is the effect of model making on a family activity? How does that help to relax?
I think it may depend on the age of your children, because if you've got a 2-year-old who's all thumbs and is going to squish it all, or a 6-year-old, or even teenagers, something like that, it may depend on them specifically and their own ability to concentrate. Well, I think if you started out simply, I think it could be quite a good creative exercise to bond together and to find a common ground where you could get these characters to come to life a little bit. I think it would be quite relaxing. It might be stressful if you make it too overcomplicated. Start simply, and you literally want to have a little bit of maybe a soundtrack in the background. Your character walks on, waves to the camera, and then walks back off again. And that would be your beginning, your little intro into having a little experiment. So I think it would be quite good for a family to give that a go.
Yeah, that's a great comment because it really helps to see it's actually possible. And I just remembered while we were talking that about 5 years ago, so my kids were 8 and 13, they decided to do something like that. And all they had was the eyesight camera on their old Apple Macs. And they had some Legos and a few cars. And they literally sat in front of a desktop computer and set up so that it looked like in the end that these little cars were going on a ramp and jumping and then going on their body and going, for example, from the back to the shoulders up to the head. And then they did the whole thing in iMovie. And I didn't even know how to use iMovie. And they made it. And they did it all on their own. I never showed them how to use a program whatsoever. And they just spent hours and hours and hours taking these photos. And it was so cute. And, it was so much better than just playing video games or being on social media or just whatever people do is, oh, we are bored. They were so creative. And I always thought, well, it ought to be done again. It's something that takes so much joy. You've done something, and then it's so fun to watch, actually.
They created content. They didn't just soak up content. They created something fresh.
I think that's the big difference when we talk about art. When we are making it, it's so much more meaningful to us because we're all creators. Even if, let's say, you can't draw, can't do anything, but you can pick up colorful objects in the house and put them in an order and then take away one and then add one, and you're making an animation. And so you can write, for example, happy birthday. That's animation, isn't it? It's very slowly with all these colorful beads. Or you can make every object. Or what would be the cheapest way of making props? And not just the objects, so the puppets or whatever, yeah? But if I wanted to make backgrounds, would you just use like cardboard boards? or even paper to make it really small?
Sure, yeah. Just you want to think miniature, really. It's almost like making a little set for a theater. If you have a little bit of a sheet or a cloth, or yeah, you can use cardboard boxes if you wanted to start out that way. There's plenty of ways that you could give it a go. It depends. Do you want to have a naturalistic background? Do you want to film it on your patio so you've got your garden behind it? Do you want to, if you did it with the camera and you were doing it real time, if it was an actual sky outside, you would see, and you did it all in one day, you would see the change in the sunshine. Maybe that's something you want to feature into it, where your animation is doing something at a different rate to what's going on in the real world, because obviously you're pointing your set, you're working at 24 frames a second, your characters are moving super slow, but everything else happening around that is happening a lot quicker. So that would show up as well. It depends what you want. If you want to put it into a set and put it away in a room somewhere, then you can block out the lights and have your own type of lighting. And that way your lighting can be more consistent, and then you can create an illusion that it is the place that you choose and not be dictated to by the outdoor weather.
Yes, that's a very important point because you want your project to be just right. I'm so glad we talked about that because it gave me a few ideas. We're still in summer and maybe you can go outside and look at some inspiration. We don't have to be stuck indoors in fear of dying. There is so much we can do. And even just looking at what is going on in the natural world, maybe it will give us some inspiration. So, do you have any suggestions for those at home who say, I would like to do a little bit of animation? What can I do to get started? So, I would like tips for people who've never done it and people maybe who have tried and they would like to go serious. So, just tell us what you think. If you wanted to get started, what would be your mindset for that?
To get started, it depends whether you want to do. I would say that there are three main areas. There's the CGI route, where you're learning three-dimensional software. There is the hand-drawn route, where you're doing your 2D animation, which you could do traditionally or digitally. And then, of course, there is the stop-motion route, where you could start off with making models and doing things with a camera. So if you're going to start off simply, for stop motion, get yourself a basic program on your phone and some plasticine, or some Lego figures, and start out that way. Hand drawn animation, start with flip books. Little basic 40, 50, 60 page of a bouncing ball, or a pendulum, or maybe a little character walking, like a little walk cycle. Or if you want to get into CGI and three-dimensional, model making, or CGI, there's a program called Maya, or there is Mudbox, or there is a few different things online that you can get for free to make three-dimensional animation or model making on the computer. So there's a few different things that you can even animate in Photoshop, believe it or not. I don't animate that way, but I've seen and heard of quite a few animators that I've come across who have animated in Photoshop and come up with some really great results. So there's a few things to consider.
Like, isn't that in Photoshop you can make your own GIF images that are moving, right? You have all these photos, and so do you think that the learning curve is okay for a normal teenager or 20-year-old? In one afternoon they can learn that.
I think you could probably do stop motion in an afternoon. For 2D animation, I think it may take a little longer, and then the 3D animation, 3D model making may take even longer than that, because you're learning about depth and height and vectors and things like that. But I think if you're going to start simply, from my own experience, I would say that stop motion animation is a great place to start, because it's tactile, it is hands-on, and it's not like having, like being on social media or being on your phone or being on the computer all the time. It's very much, this is your character, I move it, I take a picture, I move it, I take a picture, and it's very quick and immediate. And that's quite a nice alluring aspect of stop motion, because you're able to reach out and touch it and manipulate it. That's why I like it anyway.
And because of that, I think there is something about touching that makes the whole body have a different experience than just watching on television or on video.
Yes. I love the center plasticine as well. Yeah, the center plasticine is something that you can't quite replicate on a computer screen. So it's really there.
Yes, it's different. So let's pretend that there is a person that decides, well, actually, I would love to study this. This sounds amazing. I've tried a few times. Shall I go to school to learn this? Shall I learn on my own? Shall I just use YouTube and a few, Skillshare? What's the best way of learning this so you can get maybe even a career? What do you think?
Sure. If you're starting out from nothing, I would. There's 2 books I would suggest to have a look at. You might want to borrow them because they are quite in depth, but one is the Animator's Survival Guide by Richard Williams, who's a fantastic book. He was one of the main animators that animated Roger Rabbit for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and he came up with this entire way of animating. Talked about diagrams on how to go about animating, and broke it down. The other one is The Illusion of Life by Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnson, and these are 2 really great animators from the Disney era, and they did some fantastic animation. They came up with the basic, the rules of how to animate, the 12 principles of animation, and there's a fantastic book, The Illusion of Life. So I would say, for anyone who wants to know how to animate, go away and have a look at how the pros learn to animate, and have a look at the way that they do it, and have a look at how they broke down the principles. And that will start to make quite a lot of sense, because you don't just animate off the top of your head. You want to animate with to capture a little bit of life, to make something believable and make something appear like it is living and breathing and thinking and emoting. And that's the secret to animation, not just moving an object, but making it feel as though it has a life of its own. So I would say to anybody who wants to get into it, I would start with doing some of your own research. There's 2 books to have a look at. If you want to go to an animation school, have a look at some of the better schools. They're getting very good reviews, because there are schools out there that are good at teaching students. But I think you'd be better to build up your portfolio and contact places to get actual experience. That would be my angle.
It is a great point, because sometimes the school will give you a lot of essays to write. And I was talking to a photographer who just has an amazing degree in photography, and she was saying 50% of the work at university was not photography, it was writing about photography. And some people absolutely love it. It could turn into a new career. And other people just want to handle the camera. And so we're all different. So you have to be very careful what you're doing. And then later on, how are you going to express yourself, or how you're going to market yourself? That's even another topic that the university will not really handle. So it's important to know also in the end what you want to achieve. And I also wanted to ask you another question, because the animation book I bought was the one from Preston Blair from Disney. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, Preston Blair is, excellent. Yeah, really good example, yeah.
Yeah, with a hippopotamus, etc. The green book, one of my thickest books, and I went through it so many times when he explains how to draw a cute character.
Yeah.
It was delicious. Okay, as we draw to the end, we were talking last time about isolation installation and a connection to a project you started that has to do with your children. Tell us all about it.
Right. So the bit I was going to go on to was that the animation prompted me to get into making cartoons of my daughters. So I started making drawings of my daughters and started making a cartoon about my two girls. So I started my Ellie and Jen comic. But that came off the back of Isolation Installations, which was the Facebook page that I started for lockdown. So the comic is included in it, really. I started posting the images from the comic on that Facebook page as a way of, and the Isolation Installation is a way of getting artists to be creative at the time of COVID-19. You know, people are isolated, and it was to give them something to try out. You know, some different things out. And although it's quite a small Facebook page, it's a way of getting the information out.
That is so fun. If I were to do that, my kids would be very embarrassed, but they're a little bit older.
It's a good job that they're really young and they're not quite learned to be embarrassed yet.
Yeah.
So I'm getting away with it so far.
Yeah, that is great. Well, it was great to have such a good chat about animation, and I hope that everyone at home has taken home some good-spirited advice about how to get on, and just do it, because you cannot really go wrong. You can just experiment and have fun. That's the whole purpose of having art. And in the other episodes, we are going to talk about more stuff. We have theater props, we have scenic art, we have war games, miniature designs. Is that correct?
Yeah, the next episode, I'm talking about the Royal Opera House. I was making props for theatre, so that'll be really good, and scenic art for the Royal Opera House. So that was an amazing experience. I also worked in a sculpture studio for a guy called Aidan. We'll get into talking more about that in another episode.
There we go. So we have Stephen just moving here to the studio, just doing this all the time for us. Thank you again for being in the show. And we are looking forward to the next episode of Create with Franz. So bye-bye, Steve, and see you soon.
Thank you, Franz. Bye.
Bye-bye. And this was another episode of Create with Franz. It's all about art.